My name is Kimberly Peterson, and at 32, I thought I understood the delicate balance of trust that keeps a hospital functioning. As a registered nurse in the cardiac intensive care unit at Mountain View General Hospital in Boulder Creek, Colorado, I'd spent 7 years navigating the complex relationships between doctors, nurses, and support staff that make life-or-death decisions possible. The morning shift change at 6 a.m. always brought its own rhythm to the CICU. Badge scanners beeped as staff filtered through secured doors, coffee makers gurgled in the break room, and the soft hum of monitoring equipment created a familiar backdrop. I'd grown to love these quiet moments before the day's intensity began, when the mountain sunrise painted the hospital corridors in gentle gold. But lately, something felt different in those morning moments. Conversations seemed to pause when I approached the nurses' station. Physicians who usually greeted me warmly now offered only brief nods before turning back to their charts. The charge nurse, Harrison Allen, had started assigning me to the more challenging patient loads without explanation, and when I asked about it, he simply shrugged and mentioned administrative decisions. The changes were subtle enough that I questioned whether I was imagining them. Maybe it was the stress of studying for my cardiac certification exam, or the long hours I'd been pulling to cover for short staffing. Mountain View General had been struggling with retention lately, and we were all feeling the pressure. My certified nursing assistant, Francesca Martinez, had been my closest ally through it all. She'd worked alongside me for 3 years, and I'd watched her grow from a nervous new graduate into one of the most competent CNAs on the unit. When I decided to pursue my cardiac specialty certification, she'd been incredibly supportive, even sharing her own study materials from when she'd completed additional training modules. "You're going to ace this exam," she'd told me just last week, handing me a stack of practice questions she'd compiled. "I've seen how you handle the complex cases. The doctors are lucky to work with someone like you." Her encouragement meant everything during those late-night study sessions. The cardiac certification would open doors for advancement, maybe even a position in the cardiac catheterization lab I'd been hoping for. Francesca understood those ambitions better than anyone. But even she seemed different lately. Our usual easy conversations had become more formal, more careful. When I mentioned concerns about the subtle changes I'd been noticing, she'd quickly changed the subject or found urgent tasks that required her immediate attention. The electronic health record system had been acting strangely too. Epic, our primary documentation platform, showed unusual access patterns when I reviewed my login history. Someone had been viewing patient charts I'd worked on, but the audit trail was incomplete. When I mentioned it to the IT department, they assured me it was probably just system maintenance updates. Yesterday, Dr. Harrison Thompson, one of the senior cardiologists, had questioned my assessment of a patient's condition in a way that felt oddly pointed. He'd asked me to explain my rationale for medication timing recommendations I'd never actually made, then seemed surprised when I corrected him. The confusion in his eyes lingered longer than it should have. The pieces didn't fit together yet, but the pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Something was happening beneath the surface of our normally collegial unit, something that made my stomach tighten every time I badged into work. As I prepared for another shift, reviewing patient assignments and checking medication schedules, I couldn't shake the feeling that the trust I'd built over 7 years was somehow being undermined. The mountain view from the CICU windows, usually a source of calm, now seemed to reflect my growing. The silence in the break room felt heavier than usual as I gathered my things, and I realized that whatever was happening, it was about to become impossible to ignore. The foundation of trust between Francesca Allen and me had been built over 3 years of working side by side in Mountain View General's cardiac intensive care unit. She'd started as a newly certified nursing assistant, eager but uncertain, and I'd taken her under my wing during those first overwhelming weeks. "Kim, I don't know how you make it look so effortless," she'd said during her second month, watching me coordinate care for 4 critical patients while managing medication schedules and family communications. "I feel like I'm drowning half the time." I'd smiled, remembering my own early days. "You're not drowning, Francesca. You're learning to swim in deep water. That's different." From that moment, our professional relationship had deepened into something approaching friendship. She'd confided her struggles with the demanding coursework for her RN prerequisites, and I'd shared my own challenges balancing continuing education with full-time work. When she mentioned wanting to specialize in cardiac care eventually, I'd offered to help however I could. The turning point came when I decided to pursue my cardiac certification. The advanced cardiac life support and cardiac catheterization lab certifications would position me for the promotion I'd been working toward for years. The study materials were expensive, and the preparation time intensive. I have all the ACLS study guides from when I was considering the program, Francesca had offered one evening as we finished our shift. And my friend, who works at Presbyterian St. Joseph, has the cardiac cath lab materials. You're welcome to borrow everything. Her generosity had been overwhelming. The materials she shared were comprehensive, well-organized, and exactly what I needed. We'd spent several evenings in the hospital's family education room, reviewing cardiac rhythms and catheterization procedures. Her questions were insightful, her enthusiasm infectious. You're gonna ace this certification, she'd said, organizing the borrowed textbooks into neat stacks. And when you get that cath lab position, maybe you can put in a good word for me when I finish my RN. Those study sessions had felt like the best kind of mentorship, mutual, supportive, and professionally enriching. I'd trusted her completely, sharing not just study materials, but also my career aspirations and concerns about the competitive nature of cardiac specialization. But subtle changes had begun appearing in our interactions around the time I submitted my certification application. Francesca's enthusiasm seemed forced, her questions more probing than supportive. She'd started asking detailed questions about my patient assessments, my documentation practices, my communication with physicians. Dr. Harrison Mitchell mentioned something interesting about medication protocols yesterday, she'd said casually one afternoon. He seemed to think there might be some confusion about timing recommendations in the unit. I'd found the comment odd. Dr. Mitchell rarely discussed protocols with nursing assistants, and medication timing was clearly within nursing scope of practice. When I'd asked for clarification, Francesca had shrugged it off as probably nothing important. The first concrete sign of trouble came during a routine case review meeting. Dr. Harrison Thompson, the senior cardiologist, had pulled me aside afterward, with an expression I couldn't quite read. Kim, I wanted to clarify something about the Morrison case from last week, he'd said, consulting his tablet. There seems to be some question about your assessment documentation and medication recommendations. My stomach had dropped. The Morrison case had been straightforward, a post-operative cardiac patient with standard recovery protocols. I'd documented everything meticulously, following established guidelines. I'm not sure what questions there might be, I'd replied carefully. Could you be more specific? Dr. Thompson had frowned, scrolling through his notes. According to the information I received, there were concerns about your clinical judgment regarding beta blocker timing and your understanding of post-operative monitoring protocols. The words had hit like ice water. Those were fundamental aspects of cardiac nursing, areas where I had years of experience and excellent performance reviews. Someone had questioned my basic competencies to one of the most respected cardiologists in the hospital. Dr. Thompson, I'd like to review that case with you directly, I'd said, maintaining professional composure despite my racing heart. I'm confident in my documentation and clinical decisions, and I'd appreciate understanding where these concerns originated. He'd agreed, but the damage was already done. The seed of doubt had been planted, and I could see it in his expression as he made notes in his tablet. Similar incidents began occurring with increasing frequency. Dr. Harrison Foster, the department's newest attending, had questioned my patient education documentation. Dr. Harrison Blake had asked me to explain my rationale for family communication strategies I'd never implemented. Each time, the physician seemed to be responding to information that didn't match my actual practice. The pattern became impossible to ignore when nurse manager Catherine Allen called me into her office for what she termed a routine check-in. Kim, I want to be transparent with you, Catherine had said, her tone carefully neutral. I've received some informal feedback about clinical practices in the unit that I need to address. My hands had clenched in my lap. What kind of feedback? Nothing formal, nothing that's going in your file, she'd assured me quickly. But there have been questions raised about documentation accuracy and clinical decision-making. I wanted to give you the opportunity to address any concerns you might have about your workload or stress levels. The implication was clear. Someone had suggested my performance was declining, that stress or overwork might be affecting my clinical judgment. After 7 years of exemplary reviews and increasing responsibilities, the suggestion felt like a professional slap. Catherine, I'd like to know specifically what concerns have been raised and by whom, I'd said, keeping my voice steady. My documentation has always been thorough, and I'm confident in my clinical decisions. If there are specific issues, I'd prefer to address them directly. She'd shifted uncomfortably. The feedback came through informal channels, Kim. Nothing I can point to specifically, just general concerns about consistency and communication. Informal channels. That phrase had echoed in my mind for days afterward. In a hospital setting, informal channels usually meant gossip, speculation, or deliberate misinformation. Someone was systematically undermining my professional reputation through whispered concerns and casual comments to physicians. The realization had crystallized during a particularly difficult shift when Dr. Harrison Thompson had questioned my assessment of a patient's cardiac rhythm interpretation, something I'd been doing expertly for years. As he'd walked away, shaking his head slightly, I'd caught sight of Francesca watching from the nurse's station. Her expression hadn't been sympathetic or concerned. It had been calculating, almost satisfied. In that moment, the pieces had fallen into place with devastating clarity. The study materials she'd shared, the casual questions about my practice, the probing conversations about my patient care decisions, it had all been reconnaissance. She'd been gathering information about my clinical approaches, my documentation style, my communication patterns with physicians. Then she'd been using that information to create doubt about my competencies. The betrayal cut deeper than any professional slight could have. This wasn't just about career sabotage. It was about the violation of trust, mentorship, and friendship. I'd opened my professional life to her, shared my knowledge and aspirations, and she'd weaponized that intimacy against me. Standing in the medication room that evening, double-checking dosages for the third time because I no longer trusted that my clinical judgment wouldn't be questioned, I realized the full scope of what was happening. Francesca Allen, the nursing assistant I'd mentored and supported, was systematically destroying my reputation through carefully planted seeds of doubt about my clinical competencies. The mountain view from the CICU windows no longer offered comfort. Instead, it reminded me how far I could fall if I didn't find a way to expose the truth and reclaim my professional standing. The silence in the unit felt charged with unspoken accusations, and I knew that confronting this betrayal would require every ounce of courage and strategic thinking I possessed. The next morning, I arrived at Mountain View General with a plan. The I needed wouldn't come from confronting Francesca directly. That would only give her time to cover her tracks or spin the narrative further. Instead, I needed to document the pattern and find witnesses who could corroborate what was happening. My first stop was the nurse manager's office. Catherine Allen had been overseeing our unit for 8 years, and her reputation for fairness was well established throughout the hospital. When I knocked on her door at 0630, she looked up from her morning reports with concern. "Kimberly, you're early today. Everything all right?" I closed the door behind me and took the seat across from her desk. "Catherine, I need to discuss a serious professional matter. I believe someone has been deliberately undermining my clinical reputation through false information shared with physicians." Her expression shifted to full attention. "That's a significant allegation. Tell me what you've observed." I laid out the timeline methodically. The sudden questioning of my assessments, the pattern of physicians double-checking my work, the correlation with Francesca's presence during key interactions. Catherine listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on her tablet. "Have you documented these incidents?" she asked when I finished. "I started yesterday. I have dates, times, and witnesses for the most recent occurrences." I handed her a printed summary I'd prepared. "I am requesting a formal investigation into professional misconduct." Catherine reviewed the document carefully. "This is thorough, Kimberly. I'll need to involve human resources and potentially our chief nursing officer. Are you prepared for what that process entails?" "I understand it won't be easy, but my professional integrity is at stake." She nodded slowly. "I'll initiate the investigation today. In the meantime, I want you to continue documenting everything. And Kimberly, be careful about discussing this with other staff until we have more information." The investigation process moved faster than I'd expected. By Wednesday, Diana Allen from Human Resources had interviewed me twice, requesting detailed statements about each incident. The hospital's policy required them to interview all parties involved, which meant Francesca would soon know about the formal complaint. I was reviewing patient charts in the break room Thursday afternoon when she approached me. Her usual friendly demeanor had been replaced by something harder, more defensive. "Kimberly, I heard you've been talking to management about me. I looked up from my documentation, keeping my voice level. I've reported concerns about professional misconduct to the appropriate channels. Professional misconduct? Her laugh was sharp. I've been nothing but supportive of you. If physicians are questioning your work, maybe you should look at your own practice instead of blaming others. Francesca, I know what you've been doing. The study materials, the questions about my patient care approaches, you've been using that information to create doubt about my competencies. Her expression flickered for just a moment, and I saw something like panic before she regained control. That's ridiculous. I shared those materials to help you, and if I've asked questions about patient care, it's because I'm trying to learn. Then you won't mind participating fully in the investigation. She stood abruptly. This is unbelievable. After everything I've done to support you, this is how you repay me? The conversation ended there, but I could see the calculation in her eyes. She was already planning her next move. Friday brought an unexpected ally. Harrison Mitchell, one of the senior nurses who'd been working CICU for over a decade, approached me during our shift overlap. Kimberly, can we talk privately? We stepped into the family consultation room, and he closed the door. I've been watching what's been happening with the physicians questioning your assessments. At first I thought it was just coincidence, but yesterday I overheard something that concerns me. My pulse quickened. What did you hear? Francesca was talking to Dr. Thompson near the elevator. She mentioned that you'd been struggling with some of the more complex cardiac interpretations and suggested he might want to double-check your rhythm analyses. The way she said it, it wasn't casual conversation, it was deliberate. Relief flooded through me. Finally, a witness who could corroborate the pattern. Would you be willing to provide a statement to Human Resources? Already done, he said. I spoke with Diana Allen this morning. I've also been paying closer attention to Francesca's interactions with the medical staff. There's definitely a pattern there. The investigation intensified over the following week. Diana Allen interviewed multiple staff members, reviewed communication logs, and examined the timeline of physician concerns about my work. The hospital's electronic systems proved invaluable. Every badge swipe, every chart access, every communication was logged and timestamped. On Tuesday, Catherine called me into her office again. This time, Diana Allen and the Chief Nursing Officer Amanda Allen were present. Kimberly, we've completed our preliminary investigation, Amanda began. This supports your allegations. We've identified a clear pattern of inappropriate communication between Francesca Allen and multiple physicians regarding your clinical competencies. Diana opened a folder. We found documentation of at least 12 separate instances where Francesca initiated conversations with physicians specifically about your patient assessments. In several cases, she provided information about your clinical approaches that she could only have obtained through your mentoring relationship. What happens now? I asked. Francesca Allen's employment has been terminated effective immediately, Amanda said. She violated multiple policies regarding professional conduct, confidentiality, and workplace harassment. We're also implementing additional training for all staff about appropriate professional communication and reporting procedures. Catherine leaned. Kimberly, I want you to know that your clinical competencies were never in question from a management perspective. The physicians who expressed concerns have been informed about the investigation results, and we're confident your professional reputation will be fully restored. The relief was overwhelming, but I kept my composure. Thank you for taking this seriously and conducting a thorough investigation. There's one more thing, Diana added. We're implementing new policies about mentoring relationships and information sharing to prevent this type of situation in the future. We'd like your input on those policies given your experience. Walking back to the CICU that afternoon, I felt the weight of the past month beginning to lift. The mountain view from the unit windows looked different now. Less like a precipice and more like the solid foundation it had always been. The investigation had vindicated me, but more importantly, it had restored my confidence in the hospital's commitment to professional integrity. Harrison Mitchell was waiting at the nurses' station when I returned. How did it go? Justice was served, I said simply. He smiled. Good. The unit's going to be a better place without that kind of toxicity. As I prepared for my shift, reviewing patient assignments and checking equipment, I realized that the betrayal had taught me something valuable about trust and professional relationships. The silence in the CICU no longer felt charged with unspoken accusations. It felt clean, purposeful, ready for the important work we did every day.